guess one shouldn't start by saying, you see, I'm not an idiot. Thank you, Bethany, for that. You know, when you're in politics, it really is a family affair. When you do something like this, run for public office. I've had some notion of that working with Newt Gingrich for the last several years. It very much is a family affair in the sense that you're doing it all the time. It impacts family life. In the case of this campaign, you know, it started out in my office downstairs. You know, in this race, I have a tremendous leader as the campaign manager, Zach. Where is Zach? I think Zach is a composite of many of the revolutionary leaders we had in this country at the time of the revolution. I think you will rarely find a young man so passionate and so committed, so dedicated, and I'm so humbled that he is helping me in this race with 4.5 weeks to go to victory. You know, we were working together. You know, my youngest son is Jack, and we have Zach. And trust me, we have called Zach Jack and Jack Zach numerous times. And you know, Zach's a competitor, and he's a coach. He's trying so desperately to get Jack to walk before Jack's time was to walk. And then we learned something really interesting, is that Jack and Zach have the same birthday. Yeah, May 16th, so it's coming up. So we may have a Jack and Zach party. You know, and one thing on a personal basis, so we are coming up on 1 year of Jack's birthday, and you know, 3 months before he was born, Bethany was in a very bad traffic accident on 295, and there was she was in the hospital for 5 days, and it was really touch and go in terms of whether there was going to be some surgery to sort of see what was internally a problem. And so when May 16th last year came around, we were all breathing a sigh of relief when Jack came into the world healthy and happy, and a year later we celebrate many blessings. And Bethany told about all the things that we have going on, but one of them was a recovery that she had from a pretty close call on 295. So there's a lot we're thankful for as a family as I stand here before you. Now, in terms of running, you know, for the last 6 years, 6.5 years, for the people in this room, of course, we have not been happy about what's been going on in Washington. But you know, in America, you don't like what's happening, you organize, you try to change things, and you operate according to the same rules of the game that the side that has put things upon you that you don't like had operated on. But what we've come to see in the last year, you know, 18 months, is that the rules of the game are being changed. The rules of the constitutional system are being changed. And they're not being, I mean, they're being abused, they're being ignored. And that, you know, we see it in a couple areas. We've seen it in the Affordable Care Act over and over, these unilateral changes. We've seen it in the immigration orders. That was telegraphed for 6 months, and you know, the kind of work I was doing with Newt, you know, we're trying to think creatively how to stop this. And you know, the president telegraphed it for 6 months, and yet it came into being, and we haven't been able to stop it at the federal level. We've seen it at the Environmental Protection Agency. Again, cap and trade was defeated in 2009, and I was a part of an effort through Newt's organization, American Solutions for Winning the Future, to stop that energy tax in the Congress. It passed the House, and in 2010, it never made it past the Senate. And I remember being in then Senator John Kerry's office. He invited several of us over to try to persuade us of the wisdom of putting a cap on America's economic growth. and it really was surreal, because he passionately believed in the government could control emissions for an entire 320 million person economy. But seeing that up close, one really got a sense of the sort of the ideological assault that's on common sense that we have in this country. And then the last straw for me, before I thought about running, was, you know, the issue of marriage. Now, I know people differ about how to define marriage. In Virginia, we had a very big argument about this in 2006, and we decided it in a certain way. And Bob Marshall up the road in Loudoun County is not the only person who understands how to change the Constitution of Virginia. If people wanted to change the Constitution of Virginia, there's a way to do it. not the way that the Supreme Court is doing. The Supreme Court, I believe, is acting well beyond the scope of its powers.
Amen.
In trying to change state constitutional laws. Now, 2 years ago, they did that at the federal level. And it really was then when I began to think, the only way you could arrest this overreach that I saw, I thought, was really the state legislatures.
Right.
That if state legislatures became newly assertive, they could at least start a political conversation and a political confrontation. Because in American life, oftentimes, the only way you stop things is with a confrontation. It's not with a lawsuit, it's with a political confrontation. And there are many, we have a lot of lawsuits about the Affordable Care Act. We have many lawsuits now about the EPA and what it's doing. And we have lawsuits on marriage. But if the state legislatures would be newly assertive, they would bring to the people the stakes that are at issue. And when it then happened last October, with the Supreme Court overturning the state constitutional amendments, that's when I actually looked up and said, in the American tradition, well, maybe I should run for office. If I don't see anybody making this argument, maybe I should make the argument. And then began the first campaign before the campaign, and that was the campaign with Bethany. And that took a little bit of time, and it was also, something we talked about and prayed about, and it was also something that I spoke at length with Newt and shared with him. And when I first discussed this idea with him, I was very grateful to have an employer and a friend who took the posture of what it might be like when an 18-year-old son says to the father, "Hey, I'm thinking of joining the Marines." And he listened very closely, and he was very clear in his advice, his initial advice. He says, "You have to think about this ruthlessly, because this is not a game. This is not academic-oriented thing that you do. You have to think seriously about it, because when you get into a political race, there is real combat." And he was not wrong about that. There is real combat in this race. So what I want to share with you is the origins of me thinking about running for office. And that's where it crystallized. I talked to Newt and Calista about running, and as they began to be convinced about how convicted I was, they were all thumbs up, all behind me, all the way. So in this race, I talk about two things, primarily. I would say a down-the-line conservative on my website, but when I talk to people, I talk about there's two very important building blocks for a successful Virginia future. And the one I've just described, we have to be much more aggressive as a state, pushing back against a federal government that is overreaching into every aspect of our lives.
Amen. Amen.
We have to have a voice saying that consistently, and of course, it's just not the elected representatives, it is the people. Now, one of the things I've discovered in the course of this race is the tremendous organization of people at the grassroots level, their understanding of the stakes that are at issue. No leader can go to Richmond unless they are in touch with the people who are actually making the difference on the ground and winning public opinion, winning minds, and also getting people organized to act on behalf of pushing back on the federal government. And that's a tremendous asset to the Commonwealth. It's also a tremendous asset in this campaign. So that's the big first building block. And then I would say very quickly in this regard, the one area that I think we can push back most aggressively and be unified on is this effort by the Environmental Protection Agency called the Clean Power Plan, which would effectively raise, according to Dominion Power, our electricity rates here by 30%.
Oh, God.
Now, when you think about 30% on your own personal economies, and you think about that rifling through the economy, the impact that would have on our livelihoods, personal livelihoods, and our economic livelihoods, this is insane, and we have to stop and fight it. Now, there was an effort in the General Assembly last session to try to do some measure of protection. They wanted the General Assembly to at least say they had a choice, but it failed in the Senate. Failed in the Senate because for whatever reason the Senate was too interested in what Governor McCall's opinion was of the matter. I say we defund any cooperation with that plan. We stand up for Virginia. We protect Virginia from a 30% increase in electricity rates for no purpose whatsoever. The head of the EPA said this is not about pollution control. This is about an investment opportunity, that she says. Now, I don't know what kind of investment opportunity allows you to pay $500 more a month or a year if you're a fixed income senior and get nothing in return. Okay? We have seniors on fixed income. This is a direct assault on them. We need to protect them. And this is a winning issue both for Republicans in this race and also statewide coming into November. The second big major building block for success in this state will be find ways to lower the income tax rates so we can be a much more dynamic, growing economy in Virginia. And I think one of the great things about Virginia is we can take notice of what happens in the rest of the country. Well, in the rest of the country, there are 9 states that have no state income tax. They have bigger economies, they grow faster, they attract people, they have greater take-home pay. So then the question is not, should we do it, it's what's the best way to transition to that future? And you know what? We have another model there, North Carolina, just our neighbor to the south. They took steps in 2013 to change their laws to lower their income tax rates. Their corporate tax was like 6.9%, and they had a graduated, just like Virginia, income tax of many rates. They said, you know what? We need to make a flatter income tax, and we need to lower it, and we should have an eye on erasing the corporate income tax. Why? A bigger economy, more jobs, greater take-home pay. They also put something in their law called a trigger, and that is, if the tax revenues come in at a certain level, automatically, income tax or corporate tax is going to go drop down. We don't have to have a big debate about it. We don't have to wring our fingers about where are we going to put this money. We're going to drop it. Just yesterday, they announced with great fanfare in North Carolina, they have a $400 million surplus coming in. And their corporate income tax is now looking to be back at 3%. So we should take note of what works in other places, and what's working in North Carolina can work here in Virginia. And you know, we compete on the basketball court, Virginia versus North Carolina, we're going to have to compete in taxes. So I just want to say a couple other things before I introduce our featured speaker. You know, we had a debate the other night. You know, I'm in a race with 3 other people. You know, and they want to win just as much as I do. And they're fighting every day out there, calling, walking door to door. We've had a number of forums. And most of the forums have been sort of 5-minute introduction, and then everybody gets asked the same question, and you know, we all get a chance to respond to the same question. Well, we had a debate, a true debate on Tuesday night, and John Fredericks is there in the back. He was the devilish architect of this outfit. And you know, asked the question, people got a chance to respond, the other candidates had a chance to respond in 60 seconds, and then the person who was asked had a chance to have the last word. So it was a true debate. And I won't go on about it, but I thought there was a very important moment in that debate that I think in part helps to define the rest of this campaign. I was asked by my opponent, Bill Janis. He was critical of one of my positions. And the position is that I took a pledge, a term limit pledge, that I wouldn't serve more, if elected, I wouldn't serve more than 3 terms. Now, he had cited that I was at an event where I expressed some skepticism about term limits because I was anxious that if you get, what happens if you get rid of all the elected representatives and you have this permanent staff in place? Because permanent staff can also be a source of entrenched power. They become the only answer, and they define what the answer parameters are. But as I talked with others and I listened, you know, you can term limit the staff in the position they're in. So as I became comfortable with that, I came out with a term limit pledge. And, you know, I was sitting there and I was taking this criticism about taking a term limit pledge, and I turned to him, I said, well, are you going to be taking a term limit pledge? You know, you served in the House of Representatives for 10 years, are you going to take a pledge? And the answer was no. And I turned to my colleague on the right, Dr. Donovan, and she also is not going to take a pledge. Now, the reason I think that's significant is I tell you, there's one thing I've learned in the course of this debate, talking to people. You know, when you go out, you talk to people at the doors, you talk to supporters, you listen. And one of the things I picked up and what I learned is you learn when you listen. And that is, people distrust the political class. I mean, I knew that, but I did not know the intensity. I did not know the intensity. I had a 3-hour lunch with somebody who's very active. He's read Obamacare 3 different times. He knows it up and down. And I told him about what I stood for and what I'm trying to do. And at the end of this lunch, the really question he cared about was the one that he posed to me. He goes, how do I know you're not going to sell me out? How do I know you're not going to sell me out? That's a question in many different forms I've been asked all along. And I think a precondition for running in this environment is a term limit pledge. And so I've taken that pledge. And I think the reason it's so significant is because they've seen behaviors in Richmond where an entrenched political class does not represent the interests of the people. Because anybody going to Richmond is going to face two groups of people. And they have a danger of forgetting the third group of people. The two groups of people they're going to immediately meet, the lobbyist and the party leadership.
Yep.
Okay? Sometimes party leadership and the lobbyists are in line with the people, but oftentimes they're not. And if you forget who you're representing, well, then you're selling out the people. And so the big question in this race is, which candidate is going to best represent the interests of the people? Now, I've taken the term limit pledge as just one indication of representing the interests of the people. Colleague, my opponent who asked that question, you know, he's got a lot to answer for, because in 2004, Bill Janus had an opportunity to represent the interests of the people when it came to Mark Warner's tax increase. And one day he voted against it in Finance Committee, but the next day, party leadership asked him to stay home. And he stayed home. When he was asked about it, he said he was cooking waffles. Now, that's a big misstep if you're there to represent the people. And the question he has to face if he's explaining to people why he's going to do better in the Senate is, how is he going to make sure he represents the interests of the people? Now, I just wanted, before asking you to come up, we have 4.5 weeks left. I appreciate so much everybody here tonight. This is a horse race. I'd ask you to think about who you know, your friends. As somebody said, any rich uncles in the room that you know about, or rich aunts somewhere, please get them involved. We're trying to raise resources to get up on radio, also complete our mail program. This is a real competition, and if anybody wants to volunteer or knows somebody can volunteer, it's really important. Every volunteer on the phone makes a huge difference. If you have any question about that, is Ms. Waverly here? This is an example. She is an example of one person making a huge difference.
Oh, thank you.
Huge difference. And perhaps having gone on too long, let me introduce our featured guest speaker. So, I started working for Newt in 2003. I got to know him first because when I was working for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, trying to elect Republicans in 2002, Newt had asked somebody, do you know anybody who could do a research project on constitutional amendment making? Because Newt was very upset with the decision of the Supreme Court. And I thought, well, sure, I'm interested in doing that, Newt Gingrich. And so Newt wrote me a note and said, this is an extraordinarily important topic, and can you research this? And little did I know I was actually the end of one of Newt's many maxims, which is import knowledge, export work. And that is, if he can export work to someone, especially who's not on his payroll, he can then import the knowledge. And he can learn an immense amount that way. And so when I did that, I thought afterwards, wow, you know, my next step in the political world, here's a guy who's so creative, energetic, who's always forward-looking. And one thing about Newt Gingrich, which I sort of vaguely understood, but explicitly understood after having worked for him, every day he's thinking of the national interest. He's thinking at a national level, and he's thinking about how to advance our values as conservatives. And he does it in a very creative, strategic, and tactical way. And when you get to work for Newt, you get enormous opportunities to do lots of different eclectic things. And one of the things I've been so grateful working with Newt and his wife Callista is on documentary filmmaking. I never thought as a law school grad that I'd have an opportunity to shape $1 million+ budget on a film about, for example, Pope John Paul II and his first trip back to Poland as Pope, and how that trip catalyzed a set of events that ultimately led to the downfall of communism. Well, that's one of the things I've been able to do with working with Newt and Callista. It has been the greatest professional experience of my life working for Newt. He is an extraordinarily generous man. He is so thoughtful. He is one of the great American leaders. He, of course, will go down in history for anything else than the winning the majority control in the House of Representatives after 40 years. And that kind of leadership manner that he took to win over that House majority, he shows day in and day out as an employer. And I got to tell you, I'm one of the blessed people to have an education with Newt Gingrich. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend Newt Gingrich.